It's the 15th day of September 2022, day 2 of 100 days. Yes, we are counting them from day 1 to day 100 of the Ruto administration. Things that he said he's going to do and implement within the first 100 days. We've already seen some, and we are waiting for the others. Bei ya mafuta imepanda on day 2. Fertilizer inakuja maybe on day 16. We'll wait and see
next week
on what day it comes. Right?
Sawa.
Mombasa port operations. Now that one is, he said it's not yet operational. But let's see how many days it will happen. Anyway, all those things are happening within the first 100 days. Our job is to remind the administration and to track the progress. It's also Thursday. It's Justice Thursdays. It's a day that we talk the language. My lord, my ladies, may it please the court. We have a judge in the room, the Honorable Dr. Imaana Laibuta, Judge of the Court of Appeal. Before we welcome him to the show, let me read the day's proverb, courtesy of C.T. Muga. It's an ancient Egyptian proverb. The worst things, to be in bed and sleep not, to want for one who comes not, to try to please and please not. To be in bed and sleep not, to want for one who comes not, to try to please and please not. The worst things, according to Egyptians. Those ones. My lord, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
You know, you have to try now this language. Say.
Yes. My lord. Right?
Good morning, your lordship.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank you. The Situation Room, day 2 for me.
Day 2
as well.
Day 2 for you as well.
Right.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
We are here today to talk about a new piece of legislation, and this one concerns children. The Children's Act 2022, which has repealed the Children's Act of 2001, and looking at the rights of children in very many things. You know, children, we talk about children. At what point do these rights start applying? Is it at the point of conception or at the point of birth?
Well, I guess rights have everything to do with the ability to assert them.
Mm-hmm.
You can assert a right unless you're alive. And life begins at conception.
All right.
And I guess that's where the right to life begins for children.
Okay. So then from that point when a child is conceived up to the age 18, there are very many things that they're entitled to. Some of those rights are guaranteed in the Constitution: right to education, right to health, right to accessing a clean environment. And then there are all those rights to, parenthood and protection and care. And then we'll also talk about very many things like, adoption and matters of, taking care of children. So let's start from the very beginning. What is it that the Children's Act 2022 has that's different from the previous laws?
Let's remember that we had the Children Act of 2001. And before that, we had an array of statutes that were designed to implement various rights of the child, parental responsibilities, and so forth. But come 2001, we had the Children Act that consolidated all those statutory provisions. But remember, we also had the Constitution 2010, which was a real revolutionary statute law that brought in quite a number of things, including the rights of the child and Article 53. Now, that made it necessary then to reform the law on children, not just consolidating, but as well as to be sure that we were aligned to the Constitution, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the African Convention and protocols, and as well borrowing from other jurisdictions to see what was necessary to make it more vibrant. And that's why we came up with the 2022 Act. It's a 2022 Act, yes, but it began way back. It's taken about 10, maybe 12 years to reform the statute law.
Hey,
It's a very intricate...
why take so long?
Good question. The rights of the child is a very dynamic sector with lots of, both state and non-state agencies. A great deal of interest, of course, by NGOs, CBOs, and non-state agencies that have a stake in it. Good question to ask, but I must say this. Life really revolves around the child.
Yeah.
Children. You ask me, I'll be talking about children. I mean, that's a subject we are all excited to discuss, whether in courts, whether in public, in the community. Children are really the center of our attention in everyday life.
Okay. Even as we look at this Act 2022 and look at what was in existence in 2001, going into then 2002, the question is, even when you talk about the rights of the child, there might be a misconstrued notion that because this child then cannot speak for themselves, quote unquote, until they've attained the age of 18, in Kenya at least, that then the custodian of that child, the parents or the guardian, then is in a position to do as they wish as concerns the well-being of the child. That is something that may have been practiced for some time. What would you have to say about that? Because essentially what we are saying is that if everything revolves around this child, that there are some things, regardless of the situation, that child must have. But then the custodianship or the guardianship of this child is handed over to parents because they cannot take care of themselves.
Yes.
So where do we play within those lines? Must parents always take into consideration the rights of this child, regardless of the fact that they are their parents? And what exactly are we saying when it comes to that?
I think the one thing we must be conscious of is this. The rights of the child, the care and protection of a child is a responsibility that we must all bear. Children cannot take care of themselves. From birth to adulthood to age 18, they need care and protection. That care and protection rests squarely on the shoulders of not just the parents, but guardians that may be appointed to exercise that care and responsibility. Rests on the shoulders of the community and, above all, on the state that must guarantee and facilitate the realization of the rights of the child. So it's a universal responsibility for all, not just for parents, not just for the community, but for the state as well as everyone that is in contact with those children, including judicial officers that process matters relating to the care and protection of children, particularly the children that are in contact or in conflict with the law.
We talk about, rights of children, especially when it comes to access to justice. And we've had these conversations here on the show a number of times. When it comes to access to justice, we see sometimes children being taken to court. At what age does a child start bearing criminal responsibility over things that they've done?
Shamefully, the 2001 Act had the criminal responsibility set at age 8.
Where?
Figure this. A child of 8 years, what does he or she really know about?
Standard 1, Standard 2 child.
Yes, you're talking about Standard 2, Standard 3 at best. What do they know about criminal responsibility? Do they even know what a crime is? They do things, they're mischievous, they do all manner of things, they trial and error kind of life. But what we have done with the 2022 Act is to raise that bar to age 12. A time we believe is ripe for children to be able to distinguish between right and wrong. And that's it.
But when
However, you've asked about the justice system.
Yes.
What this act has done is to have a consciously designed system of diverting children from the criminal justice system to what we call diversion under the children's courts, to ensure that we are not just punishing children, we're not just trying and punishing them for the wrongs that they have done, but we're trying to mold them from that wrongdoing into good citizens, people who grow up responsibly and able to make a living for themselves and be productive in society.
Judge, when we say criminal responsibility,
Yes.
a 12-year-old can bear criminal responsibility. Are we saying, and you're saying it's because at this age, then they are already at an age where they can discern right and wrong.
Yep.
But can they discern crime, responsibility, and the consequences?
Yes, we believe that with the parental responsibility that rests on the shoulders of the parents and the community and the way they are brought up and schooled or educated, they must have been inculcated into knowledge of what is right and wrong and really what crime is. I mean, if you ask a child of 2 years, 3 years, if they're able to answer your questions, you ask them, is it good to kill somebody?
Yeah.
And they'll tell you, no. Should you steal the other, children's pencils or pens or rulers or books in school? They'll tell you, no, that is wrong. They begin very early in life. However, at age 12, we believe that they're able to make decisions. Having known what is good, what is wrong, they should be able to make decisions. And good decisions at that, because that is what we aim at.
If that's the case,
Yeah.
that by the age of 12, they're able to make good decisions, they have a handle on what is right and it's wrong, why do we have this highly contentious issue of then who they choose when it comes to sex? That at the age of 18, we are saying that we can jail a young boy because he had relations with a 14-year-old girl and she's still underage. Meanwhile, we're saying at 12, they can bear criminal responsibility because they can make a decision between what is right and wrong, but over their bodies and over sexual relationships, then
We draw the
we draw the line.
Yeah. Into the one thing you find is the golden thread that runs through this 2022 Act is the principle of the best interest of the child. And it's very, very protectionist. Why use the word protectionist? Because we want a child to grow up in a wholesome, healthy manner, both mentally, emotionally, physically. Now, when it comes to sexual contact, children experiment as early as, not just in teens, but very early in age.
Yeah.
Yes.
8 years, 9 years, 10 years, they start experimenting. They start realizing that they have these things we call reproductive organs. They start touching each other. They start doing. Now we need to protect them because we want children to grow up in a way that is healthy for them, mentally, emotionally, physically, socially, economically. Now that protection must extend to the realm of sexual contact at an early age. And that's why we say that, look, if you defile a child, then you must take the responsibility. But you touch on a very controversial issue of punishing a boy that defiles a girl that is underage. I think we've begun shifting from punishing to reforming and rehabilitating those children, because both of them are children. However, when it comes to an adult defiling a child, that adult must take the responsibility of the penal consequences that come with it. Because again, this child, much as they become sensitive about their sexuality and so forth, they're really not that conscious of the consequences that follow. And as children, if two are involved, then we need to take a more reformative approach to it, rather than punish the boy and let the girl go. But of course, we've seen also adult ladies taking responsibility for defiling young boys, and that must go both ways. But the approach now really is to try and
it's more reformative
and
rehabilitative.
Yeah, it's more rehabilitative than punitive.
Judge, from where you sit, at the age of 18, is that a child or an adult when it comes to consent in terms of sexual relations?
Well, the law, the constitution is that a child is below age 18. When you attain the age of 18, you really are an adult. And therefore, we believe that you are mature to make conscious decisions and bear the responsibility when it comes to sexual matters. There are other jurisdictions where it is 21 years of age to reach adulthood, but here, I don't ask me why, but we choose 18, which I believe is a fair deal when it comes to reckoning the age of maturity.
Then pushing on the conversation about rehabilitation and trying to bring these children back to the fold, does the Children's Act 2022 also talk about the facilities that are available in the country for these services of rehabilitation?
Oh yes, we have an elaborate policy, legislative and institutional framework for the realization of the rights of the child, ranging from parental care, foster care, adoption, going up to the institutions of the the National Council for Children's Services that gives policy direction and supervision of other institutions. We have, of course, the ministry, the state departments responsible for the rights of the child. We have children, charitable children institutions, the county governments that run all manner of social welfare programs, schools, that deal with education, the right to education, and a whole array of statutory provisions in this act that ensure that the rights of the child are realized, whether it's education, whether it's health, parental care and protection, judicial services that are quite child-centered, and so forth. So we have an elaborate framework for the realization of the rights of the child under this statute law.
At least it's there on paper. We'll talk about the others, when you talk about the foster and custody and all the others.
Yeah.
But when a child enters the judicial system
Yeah.
and they've come before court, let's say at the age of 12, and then they have to be taken into, go through custodial sentence, where are they taken? Into these, Boston institutions and the others. And what does the law say about their rights while in those institutions?
Yeah. What this act has done is to divert children from the criminal justice system to ensure that the children who are in conflict with the law are processed or dealt with in a very, very, what shall I say? We talk of handling kids,
With kid gloves.
Kid gloves, yes. And that's exactly what we put on when they are brought before children's courts. Now, these courts are suitably designed to ensure that children are comfortable. Some of them, by the way, if you visit those courts, they're just at play. And you find that they probably are not even very conscious of what it is that is happening. Because the environment is designed in such a way as to make it very comfortable for them. You find paintings on the wall, cartoons, things like that. They're handled by people who hold their hands and sit with them, talk to them nicely. Even the law enforcement officers are not supposed to be uniformed because that can be scary to children. So the environment is such that the children are made very, very comfortable. It's also a very private affair. Privacy is ensured. They are in company of parents or guardians, people they are comfortable with, children officers, magistrates who are schooled to ensure that they know how to handle children, so that the environment is such that you are trying to ensure that much as you are taking corrective measures for what these children have done, the corrective measures are really to enhance the development of these children so that they grow up in responsible citizens, more than just punishing them. And that's why even the punitive measures are really relaxed. You take them into what we commonly refer to as Boston institutions or corrective institutions, rehabilitation schools, so that what you are doing is to rehabilitate them, not really to punish, but to make them, come out corrected and able to live, productive lives.
Right.
And the one thing that the Act has done is to provide for a very elaborate diversion framework. And there are levels of diversion, 3 levels of diversion. At the very apex, of course, being what you may call, the need to detain them in a rehabilitation home or school for correction, and right at the bottom, perhaps just making the child realize that you've done wrong. Can you apologize? What are you able to do? Are you able to render a service to the person you've done wrong to? Just to get to know that there is a measure of responsibility that they must bear for their wrongful conduct.
We'll continue the conversation shortly after this break, 7:30. Kenya's biggest conversation, #Justice Thursdays. And the Honorable Justice Dr. Imaana Laibuta from the Court of Appeal is here with us today. We are talking about the new Children's Act, the Children's Act 2022, which has repealed the old one of 2001. Engineer Irina Kothraila says, I was among the children that took part in drafting of the Children's Act 2001 when I was 10 years old in Class 4 at Bondo Township Primary. After, in 2003, the Orphans and Vulnerable Children's Bill.
For OVCs.
Hey, very well, Engineer Koth. She's actually participated in the drafting of these laws. Following this conversation online, we are live on KTN Home, on SpiceFM, and online.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
This conversation continues with the Honorable Justice Dr. Imaana Laibuta, Judge of the Court of Appeal. He's here with us this morning to talk about a new law, the Children's Act 2022, opportunities for the Kenyan child. My Lord, there was a moratorium on issues of adoption, where foreigners were not allowed to now adopt Kenyan children. But also there were very many issues surrounding adoption of children, even by Kenyans. Lack of understanding of the processes, lack of clear guidelines on how one goes through this. Has the Children's Act addressed adoption of children in Kenya?
Very, very stringently. I think we had come to a situation where children had become, hotcakes, a hot commodity, where you could walk into an informal settlement, wherever, and buy a child at 60K. Take it to the US, take it to Europe, and you never know what becomes of that child.
Yeah.
Some were sold into slavery, others into prostitution, and whatever, others into basically domestic servants. Of course, not to mention that there are those who had a good life, but we never, ever got to know what became of those children.
Yeah.
This law has made it necessary to process adoption in a way that we can track where this child comes from, who adopts this child. The procedure is tracked in such a way that we know that it's a clean deal. We are not engaged in sale or purchase of children. They are tracked wherever they go, whether it's domestic or intercountry adoption. Of course, in international law, treaty instruments to which we have, Kenya is a signatory, allows intercountry adoption, but we've made it in such a way that we can tell if it's an intercountry adoption, which is a measure of last resort, and I will explain that shortly. We have made sure that we are able to track where that child goes, the conditions under which that child lives, until that child attains adulthood. Now, what is it that we have done under this act to ensure that that is possible? One, the act prioritizes, cultural harmony in the process of adoption. If you're a Christian, the preferred process of adoption is that you adopt a child that is from a Christian background, Islamic background as well, probably from the same ethnic background.
But you can't always tell, Judge.
Yeah, you may not be able to tell, that's fine. But remember, when children are taken into protection institutions like charitable children institutions, the background is known. I mean, some investigation is done. They are known. If it's a child that is of age to tell that I used to go to this mosque or this church, I mean, you can tell. The name of the child tells a lot. So you are able to tell. So that you are able to synchronize that cultural, social background so that you don't have a very sharp, shift in the environment to which this child is brought in, because that in itself comes with some shocks. Let me give an example. I mean, if you walked into to Somalia, adopt a child that has been brought up in an Islamic and Somali culture, you bring him or her to Kiambu, you can imagine what that change might mean to that child. So there is that preference. Secondly, of course, intercountry adoption is a priority, domestic. Domestic adoption is the priority, and intercountry adoption really must be the last resort.
Okay.
Yeah.
And still on that, I think the conversations have now started to marry over the last few years, especially because there are very many would want to be parents who find themselves not able to have children naturally and then want to go the way of adoption. And now that you're saying that the preference is domestic adoption, obviously, from the judicial system, is it then being made easier for Kenyans to adopt children in Kenya?
Yes. Yes. In actual fact, we've had for a long time charitable children's institutions accommodating children up to the age of 18, and then they exit for many years. And this law now makes it necessary that if you are to hold a child in a charitable children's institution, it must be for a period not exceeding 3 years. And the same with foster care, not exceeding 3 years. So that at the end of it, if this is not a child that is being restored to its biological parents, let that child be adopted.
Okay.
That is the move going forward. Yeah.
So adoption starts with the home that is taking care of this child. Now, very many people would assume that, we're talking about the children's homes. Is it possible for an other environment where a child can be adopted from?
Yes. By the way, charitable children's institutions are what we refer to as children homes.
Yes.
Children are placed there for accommodation when they really have nowhere else to go or to be taken to. It's a protection measure. But you can adopt a child right from the village. The child is living with perhaps some relatives or some parents who want to give the child to adoption. And that as well is possible.
Okay. You mentioned something which is interesting, because we have maybe up until now, the Children's Act 2022, that there have been charitable children's homes that have had children living there the length and breadth of their entire existence. What happens to them? Because there are institutions today that have taken in newborn children and they are with them until the age of 18. They find ways, whether it is by, help from external sources, to educate them right up until the final level. What happens to them now if they've been in the business of this? Because in terms of categorization, they are still categorized as children's homes.
Yeah, I like your use of the word in the business of. And believe me, some children's homes have been a business, quite a number. You've seen some mushrooming in all manner of neighborhoods and bringing in children, and some are borrowed for the day. For fundraising and things like that. We have a very conscious shift to ensure that, one, charitable children's institutions are also adoption societies. And the thing they must do is, from the day that child is brought into their care and protection, they begin a process of identifying possibilities of foster care. Again, not for more than 3 years. And towards adoption, ultimately. I know some, of course, have had children for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And that must come to an end, because this is not business. We are in the business of ensuring that we have the best interest of the child, not the best interest of these charitable institutions. And that is why the institutional framework now ensures that we bring up children from those homes to foster care, ultimately to adoption.
What is the difference between the home and the foster care?
Home and foster care, yes. You see, the home is institutional. Foster care is bringing this child under a roof that is shared in a family. And that is why we have very elaborate provisions on foster care as well. In fact, the intention is to have a process of registration of foster parents who are in waiting and willing to foster children. The hope being that they would eventually adopt them so that they have legal parents.
What is that process of fostering a child? At the point of fostering, are you their legal parent or are you just a guardian? Is there any expectation on the state, for example, to provide for this child while it's under your care? What are those provisions? And
good question. You see, a foster parent is really a parent. Delete the word foster.
It's a parent.
Once the child comes under your shelter, you really are the parent to provide for them care and protection. And the Act does provide for, of course, including the regulations as well. I was privileged to draft not just the Act, but also the regulations that are shortly coming into force. The statutory process is to ensure that, one, the foster parent is capable of taking care of that child. So an assessment is made. What is your social economic, standing? Is this home suitable for this child that we're bringing in? And are you able to take care of this child? So that we're not plucking a child from some protective care into a home where the child suffers, depravity, no food, no schooling, no. So we look at all that. So your ability is key, and that's why the registration process, which I hope will begin sooner than later, should ensure that children have a place to go as soon as they are placed under protection, either in a children's institution or a child protection unit or rescue center, so that they enjoy the comfort of family life. And of course, there is also a process of supervision, so that when a child is placed in foster care under foster family or parent, the children officers are able to visit and see how these children are faring, so that from time to time they're able to tell, should this child remain here or should the child be taken elsewhere? There's all that. But you asked, is there really a parent? Yes, it is a parent, but perhaps in very loose terms. But once they are adopted and hopefully by the same foster family, then of course, those are legal parents.
Okay.
With all manner of rights, including the right of inheritance and so forth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at the rights of a child, what you've said, is very clear that, being taken care of, and one of those is the right to education. There have been some lines that have become blurry, because should those who are taking care of this child, whether it is their parents or whomever, should they be in a situation whereby they are not able to take them to school? How is then that worked out? Because there's ability, and there's also, lack of desire, things like that in some cases. How is that worked out to ensure that this child accesses the right to be educated? How then do you sort out those issues?
Yeah, well, those are difficult issues. Even for children that are not under foster care or adoption. There are many in the village that don't go to school.
Yes.
But you see, the Basic Education Act ensures that parents, whatever their needs, whatever their situation, take children to school. It's even more important when a child is under foster care, because the supervisory process and framework ensures that those children access information. In fact, there is the Act also establishes, or rather proposes, the establishment of a child protection fund that should take care of some of those needs. However, if it's a child under foster care or adoption, the adoption process or the foster care process is such that they will establish the ability of those parents to take that child to school, so that the right to education, health, protection, leisure, and whatever is taken care of. And one of the things that the Act does, and the rules as well, is to ensure that a child brought into foster care is placed in a family that has suitable accommodation, not too many children. I mean, if you have 12, 13 children, we really don't want to burden you with.
But it shows I have ability.
With another.
If I can take care of 12.
I mean, just add one. What are we talking about?
Well, I don't know. But, so the number of children and so forth, the environment, what recreational facilities does this family enjoy, and so forth. All that is taken care of, so that by the time that child is placed in foster care in that family, you are sure that child will enjoy the comfort of a family.
So the difference, as I understand it from you, Judge, is foster, you are parenting the child, but as a guardian.
Yes.
After you've adopted, then they become your legal child.
Yes.
And they've got the rights as any child that you've born.
That's it.
Now, let's talk about a child who's under foster care. During the period of being under foster care, this marriage dissolves.
Yeah.
So what happens now at that point?
Yeah, there is also the transmission of foster care, transmission of parental responsibility. And again, why the supervisory process is watertight is to ensure that in case there is dissolution of that marriage between two people under whom a child is placed in foster care, then of course a decision will be made as to where should this child next be placed. But let's also not forget that the foster care is short-lived. It should also be for a very short period, 3 years maximum, in the hope that this child is eventually adopted. And if the child has been adopted and there's dissolution of marriage, then the issue of custody, care, and maintenance comes in as between the spouses who have parted ways.
Right.
And that, I mean, that is as well as it goes for biological children. Yeah.
There's an issue that I want to ask. Does this law recognize surrogacy?
No. There was an attempt to bring that in. It was thrown out.
Why?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps ethical issues. Ethical issues. Because again, surrogacy was viewed. It was a very hot point for discussion. When drafting, I thought that a section of those who preferred the recognition of surrogacy should as well be recognized, and I put in a part for surrogacy, but the majority of stakeholders said no, we do not see that happening. If you want to have a child by so and so, have your child, get into foster care, adoption, or whatever it is, but surrogacy at some point was seen as a money-making, I mean, I could have a baby factory.
Baby factory.
Yes. I give birth for Eric Latin and I get my 200,000 and 9 months later I have
Married
another
again.
child for so and so and for Njoroge and I make a living out of giving
But
birth.
it's possible, Judge, for
Yeah.
any parent in Kenya today to decide to give up their child for adoption.
Oh, sure, yes. Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So it can still create that baby factory.
That's very well, but I'm not sure you give birth to 10, 20, hoping that they'll be adopted, because I don't think that's even workable anyway.
Sure.
You'll get tired.
I know I went down, but just one question that comes then when it comes to the unfortunate abuse of children. And we have seen many cases when they then present themselves to court. Usually there has been negotiation between family members because unfortunately a lot of times the perpetrators are members of the family, especially when we're coming to sexual abuse. How then would this change going forward? Would it change? Because clearly a child has been abused. There's been negotiation because of, economic reasons. How is this then sorted out going forward when it comes to, again, the rights of that child to not be abused?
When it comes to child abuse, sexual abuse and the likes, this law is not new. We've had law in place. Child abuse has been a crime. Sexual abuse has been all along a crime that is punishable very, very heavily. This law doesn't introduce anything new, but does lay responsibility on various institutions to ensure that action is taken to deal with child abuse. It does lay very clear ground on what abuse involves, including cybercrime, child labor, sexual abuse and things like that. It's fairly elaborate, but it's not new. Now, you talk about family members negotiating and, sweeping everything under the carpet. That's a crime in itself. You're concealing a crime. The minute you are charged with sexual abuse of a child, trust me, you won't go free. We have many cases that come on appeal where people say, oh, I have now reformed. And these are people who have abused their little daughters, their little relatives, very young children. Oh, I have reformed, I have done this, I have done, because now I can be useful to this family. And we say, thank you very much, but remain in there for the life for which you've been convicted or for the number of years you have to serve.
Judge, we thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, sir.
Justice Thursdays with the Honorable Justice Dr. Imaana Laibuta from the Court of Appeal. He's been here. He's among those that drafted the new Children's Law, the Children's Act 2022, and the regulations that also go with it. Asante for shedding light on this.
Thank you very much for hosting me.